From the commander who helped crush Rommel in North Africa, to the general who turned Britain's worst defeat in Burma into one of the Allies' biggest victories in Asia, to the strategist who constantly challenged Churchill when he thought Britain's plans were too dangerous. These are the 5 best British generals of World War II, and number 1 on this list helped lead one of the most remarkable victories of the entire war. Before we begin, this ranking is based on wartime command, results, adaptability, and strategic. Chapter 5. Harold Alexander. Harold Alexander was not the loudest British commander of World War II. He was rarely as dramatic as Montgomery or Patton, but his ability to manage difficult coalitions made him one of Britain's most valuable senior commanders. Alexander first faced the Japanese in Burma in 1942. British and Commonwealth forces were being pushed out of the country, and Alexander was given command during the retreat. The campaign ended in defeat, but the withdrawal preserved a large part of the Allied force and allowed it to reach India rather than being destroyed. His reputation grew dramatically in North Africa. In August 1942, Alexander became Commander-in-Chief Middle East, with Bernard Montgomery taking command of the 8th Army under him. Together, they prepared the British force for the Second Battle of El Alamein. Montgomery handled the army in the field, while Alexander provided the higher command that supported the campaign. The result was a major Allied victory. The Axis army was forced into retreat, and the campaign eventually ended with the destruction of Axis forces in Tunisia in May 1943. Alexander then commanded Allied forces during the invasion of Sicily, and later became the senior Allied commander in the Mediterranean. He oversaw a difficult campaign in Italy, where German defenses repeatedly slowed the Allied advance. Alexander was not perfect, and he did not personally win every battle. His strength was keeping huge multinational forces working together, while political and military disagreements threatened to pull the coalition apart. He was the kind of commander who didn't always make the headlines but made sure the people under him could succeed. And the next general did something even more difficult. He rebuilt an army after one of Britain's worst military disasters. Chapter 4. William Slim. In 1942, the Japanese army drove British and Commonwealth forces out of Burma. The retreat was brutal. Units struggled with disease, exhaustion, shortages, and terrible terrain. By the time the Allies reached India, the Japanese had taken control of Burma. William Slim inherited the challenge of rebuilding that shattered force. Slim eventually commanded the 14th Army, a huge multinational formation that included British, Indian, African, and other Commonwealth troops. He understood that defeating Japan in Burma would require more than courage. His army needed better training, stronger logistics, reliable air support, and tactics designed for jungle warfare. In 1944, Japan launched an invasion of India. The battles of Imphal and Kohima became decisive. Slim's forces held their ground, surrounded Japanese units in difficult conditions, and eventually forced the Japanese offensive to collapse. Japan suffered enormous losses, and the initiative shifted firmly toward the Allies. The National Army Museum records Japanese losses of more than 60,000 during the Imphal and Kohima campaign. Then Slim went on the offensive. His army crossed the Chindwin and Irrawaddy rivers, fought through difficult terrain, and advanced across Burma. Allied air supply allowed formations to keep operating far from traditional supply lines. By 1945, Allied forces had retaken Rangoon, and Japanese forces were being driven back. What makes Slim stand out is not one spectacular maneuver. It was the transformation of the army itself. The force that had retreated from Burma in 1942 became an effective fighting machine that could defeat Japan on its own terms. Slim also understood his soldiers. He paid close attention to morale, supply, training, and the realities of fighting in the jungle. His record makes him one of the strongest candidates for Britain's greatest general of the war. But one commander had influence over Britain's entire military strategy, and sometimes had to tell Winston Churchill that his latest idea was a terrible one. Chapter 3. Alan Brooke. Alan Brooke was different from almost every other name on this list. He spent much of the war away from the front lines. But as Chief of the Imperial General Staff from 1941 to 1946, he became Britain's senior professional military advisor and one of the most influential figures in Allied strategy. The Imperial War Museums even describes him as Britain's chief military advisor during the war and identifies him as Master of Strategy. Brooke worked closely with Winston Churchill, but he was not simply Churchill's military assistant. He challenged him. Churchill often wanted bold operations that could produce dramatic results. Brooke frequently warned against plans that he believed were too risky, especially when Britain lacked the resources to recover from failure. Their disagreements were substantial, but Brooke's role was to make sure military decisions were tested against what Britain's forces could realistically achieve. That relationship mattered. Britain was fighting a global war across the Atlantic, North Africa, the Mediterranean, Asia, and eventually Northwest Europe. Brooke had to think about the entire conflict rather than a single battlefield. He also played an important role in Britain's military relationship with the United States and in the Allied High Command. Brooke's influence was not always popular. He could be stubborn, and some of his strategic judgments remain debated. But his job was to think about what Britain could realistically accomplish, not what sounded impressive. That is why his place on this list is different. Brooke was not one of Britain's greatest battlefield generals. He was one of Britain's greatest war planners. And without that strategic level of leadership, some of Britain's most famous battlefield victories might never have been possible. Still, the next commander earned his place through one of the most important victories Britain achieved against an enemy that had badly underestimated him. Chapter 2. Bernard Montgomery. When Bernard Montgomery took command of the 8th Army in August 1942, Britain's position in North Africa was dangerous. The army had suffered the defeat at Gazala and the loss of Tobruk. Rommel was advancing toward Egypt, and British morale was badly damaged. Montgomery changed the situation. Instead of immediately launching another risky offensive, he focused on preparation. He strengthened the army, improved its organization, and built confidence before committing it to the decisive battle. Then came El Alamein. Montgomery's 8th Army attacked in October 1942 with overwhelming advantages in artillery, armor, manpower, and air power. The battle was not an easy victory, and German and Italian forces fought hard. But the Axis position was eventually broken. Rommel's army retreated west, and the victory became a major turning point in the North African campaign. The Imperial War Museums identifies El Alamein as a major British victory and notes that it coincided with the Allied landings in Morocco and Algeria. Montgomery continued commanding major Allied formations through Sicily, Normandy, and Northwest Europe. He played a major role in the Normandy campaign and later commanded the 21st Army Group during the advance into Germany. But Montgomery had weaknesses. He could be overly cautious, and his confidence sometimes created serious friction with American commanders. Operation Market Garden, which Montgomery strongly supported, failed to secure the final bridge at Arnhem and did not achieve its main objective of opening a rapid route into Germany. That doesn't erase his achievements. Montgomery was a methodical commander who understood preparation, logistics, morale, and the importance of overwhelming an enemy at the decisive point. But if Montgomery was one of Britain's greatest commanders, there was another general whose early victory in North Africa was even more astonishing. And that is why he takes our #1 spot. Chapter 1. Richard O'Connor. In December 1940, British forces in Egypt launched Operation Compass against the Italian army in North Africa. Richard O'Connor commanded the Western Desert Force. The odds were not supposed to look this good for Britain. O'Connor's force was smaller than the Italian army it attacked, yet within weeks the British had shattered the Italian position. British and Commonwealth troops captured enormous numbers of prisoners, seized large quantities of equipment, and advanced hundreds of miles across the desert. By February 1941, the Italian 10th Army had effectively been destroyed as a fighting force in Cyrenaica. The scale of the victory shocked both sides. O'Connor had used mobility, surprise, artillery, armor, and infantry coordination to defeat a much larger opponent. His forces moved rapidly across the desert, and repeatedly attacked Italian positions before the defenders could properly react. Osprey's history of Operation Compass describes O'Connor's campaign as a British blitzkrieg, with his forces sweeping roughly 500 miles along the coast, destroying 9 Italian divisions and taking about 130,000 prisoners. The victory was so complete that British leaders faced a difficult decision. Should they continue pushing west or divert forces elsewhere? The campaign was eventually interrupted because Britain needed troops for Greece, while Germany was preparing to intervene in North Africa. O'Connor's own career then took a dramatic turn. In April 1941, he was captured by German forces and spent much of the next 2 years as a prisoner of war. He eventually escaped in 1943 and returned to active command. Later, he commanded 8th Corps during the Normandy campaign and the fighting in northwest Europe. O'Connor was not the most famous British general of World War II, but Operation Compass showed exactly what an outstanding commander could accomplish with speed, surprise, and aggressive maneuver. That is why he takes number 1. Alexander provided steady senior leadership across multiple theaters. Slim transformed a defeated army into a force capable of defeating Japan. Brooke helped shape Britain's grand strategy. Montgomery rebuilt confidence and defeated Rommel at El Alamein. And O'Connor delivered one of the most spectacular British victories of the early war. But there is no single objective answer to who was Britain's greatest general. If you value battlefield performance, O'Connor or Slim may deserve number 1. If you value large-scale command, Montgomery or Alexander has a stronger case. And if you believe winning a global war requires strategy beyond the battlefield, Brooke's contribution becomes impossible to ignore. So who would you put at number 1? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more stories about the commanders, battles, and decisions that shaped World War II.